Okay. All right, it's 9:30,
Yahoo!
and here we are. I'm Jeff Wyron with Premier Property Group.
And I'm Steve Russell with Windermere Realty Trust.
Great, and we're here today to talk about improving the quality of your transactions. And I have been looking forward to doing this webinar a long time with you. And this is really going to be a webinar not only about improving the quality of your transactions. We are going to talk about that. We are going to talk about, some of the tools that are available to you in the OREF library to help you with that. But we're going to have a general conversation today about professionalism, not only with your clients, but with each other.
Absolutely.
And, I have high regard, Steve, for your professionalism, and I just am excited to have the opportunity to bounce some things off of you and have a discussion, which all of these wonderful people who are listening get to listen to.
Well, at least half of it they'll be enjoying.
Yeah. So we're going to start with just walking through our outline here, and you should all be able to see the outline on the screen. And so item number one is really just talking about setting expectations and consulting with your client.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
So whether it's a buyer consultation or a listing appointment, I perceive from the agents that I've talked to and mentored over the years and coached that a lot of people even still, and I think especially now, because our world is so fast and the market's so fast and things are so automated, that has translated itself over into how we run our real estate businesses. And it's very easy to get a phone call on a listing or a text or an email inquiry on your listing from somebody who just wants to see your listing. And maybe on the fly, you'll just go show it to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a huge safety component there for you as a realtor. Whether you're male or female, I think there's a huge safety component to going to a property that's going to be unoccupied while you're there with somebody you have never met and don't know.
Correct.
Right? I also don't think that's a professional way to run your business.
Mm-hmm.
And the third bullet point that I have about that is, how many agents have you seen that have gotten burned out over the course of their real estate career? Because in their mind, they're open for business 24/7. They're running around showing people properties and they never get a closing, or they aren't doing as much closing as they want, but they're spending a lot of time to try and get that closing to happen.
Correct. And if they're looking at when they're working, their dollar per hour that they're earning by going out on these, this will only take me 2 hours here, and this is going to just take me 2 hours here, and I'm going over here, and I haven't even asked them any questions yet about what's going on. It's just, you're just utilizing a whole lot of time where it'd be better to go out and have a coffee with somebody and be chatting about real estate than sitting there just meeting somebody there at a door.
Yeah.
And not knowing anything about them, if they qualify, anything like that.
Yeah, I think the best way that I can put that is there's a big difference between working with a true prospect and lead and chasing an inquiry.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
And that's really the difference. So let's talk about the buyer consultation appointment. I highly recommend that when you get that lead, whether it's a referred lead, whether it's a phone call from somebody off your sign, or however you get that lead, that the first thing you do is offer an opportunity to meet and talk about how you're going to do business. How are we going to work together, right? That gives you an opportunity to determine your communication pattern with that buyer, to evaluate what their needs are and their motivation, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a big difference between a buyer who wants to buy and a buyer who needs to buy, right?
Correct.
And I like ranking people in how I do business with them. And, not that I don't like everybody. I'm an amicable guy. I like everybody. But there are A's in my business and there are C's in my business. And I'm not going to give a C client A time, right?
Absolutely.
Fair way to put that. If you're an A client, we've met, you're serious, we've been out looking at property, and you called me at 3 o'clock on a Saturday when I'm mowing my lawn, I'll go put on a nice blazer and a set of slacks and show you a property, sure. But if you're a C client who isn't really willing to meet, who hasn't really, or I don't know you, and you called me at 3 o'clock on a Saturday, I'm not dropping everything to go show you a house.
And having the consultation also sets something up. I like to say that the agent is responsible for the process, the client is responsible for the decisions. By saying, okay, we're going to meet, do a presumptive close, we're going to be setting up when would be a good time for you to meet at the office so we can talk about your needs. and how this is going to work. By doing that, you're working with the process and you're controlling it. It's giving you some power, and that's going to pay off many times over through the course of the transaction with these people.
I think that's a great script. You know, if you're an agent, being able to explain that to a client and say, my job is to be responsible for the process of this transaction. Your job is going to be to make the decisions.
Yep.
That's an awesome script. Thank you for that. I think that's great.
That coffee helped this morning.
Yeah. Determining the communication pattern with the buyer. That's a bullet point on this. I already stated it, but I think that's really important. We make assumptions, right? And I think that the basic assumption that we make is to just communicate back to a client in the fashion that they communicate with us, right? Mm-hmm. If they text, we text back. If they call, we call back. If they email, we email back. That's pretty natural. And I think that's a pretty fair assumption. Mm-hmm. And yet, I don't think you can necessarily always take that for granted. I think you need to say to your client, how is it best for me to communicate with you? If I need to get a hold of you quickly, and if it's a hot market, there might be a need where I need to reach you right away, or that property is not going to be available. We're in the middle of a transaction and we're negotiating something. I might need to reach you immediately. How can I best do that to make sure that we are in sync with each other?
I agree. And the other thing there, whatever way they want to be contacted is fine, and you want to be receptive to that. But always, since you're controlling the process, also let them know there's going to be times where they're going to need to pick up the phone and you're going to need to talk to them. Yeah. Instead of 400 texts back and forth. But set that up early. Sometimes we're going to be a situation, I'll try to make it not very often, but there'll be times when we need to call. Are you okay with that? Get their permission, and then you can sit there and text, this is one of those times we need to talk. And set that up ahead of time, because keep that one open, especially if you're doing any negotiations, because you can't negotiate through text or email at all, really. You need to talk.
Yeah, text and an email can easily be misunderstood because people read into it the tone that's going through their mind, even though that might not be the tone of your voice when you were texting. Absolutely. Or whatever. You know, another thing that I think is important in that process of determining that communication pattern is making sure they know when you're available and when you're not going to be available, right? If you're the type of agent that says, hey, I'll take your call all the way up until 7 o'clock at night, but after 7 o'clock at night, if you leave me a message, it's going to be the next day, they need to know that. If you're the type of agent who says, hey, 5 o'clock to 7 p.m. every night is sacred family time for for me to have dinner with my family, they need to know that. I think most clients will be respectful of that if they know.
At the beginning. Yes, at the beginning, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last really big point here is it's an opportunity to review the sale agreement and the other transaction documents regarding contingencies with that buyer. So you and I were on the forms committee a few years ago when we significantly modified that sale agreement. And really, honestly, I don't think we changed a lot of the material text. There were some of those changes. That's natural. But the biggest change was the flow of the agreement.
Yes, you did a great job.
And I think the committee did. We all did a great job of really picking that thing apart. And I remember sitting there with the agreement, every section, was cut and pasted out. Literally, we had it on the table and we were moving the sections around to be, how would you talk through the sale agreement with the buyer? What are the most important things for them to know? Instead of having to skip from page 2 to page 7, then back to page 5 to get a point across, let's put it all together. Mm-hmm. So you can immediately go over the financing contingency with them and help them understand what that is, what it means, and what their responsibilities are. And then next thing is the contingencies. What are all of the major contingencies in the agreement that you need to know about as a buyer? And let's talk through those, which serves the purpose of helping the buyer truly understand what those contingencies are and what their rights are, but it also lends itself to a discussion about the nature of those contingencies. For example, in the home inspection process, if it's been 7 to 10 years since somebody bought a house, their perspective might be that, it's going to cost them $300 to $400 to inspect a home. But that's not true anymore.
Nope.
If you do a home inspection, a sewer scope, a radon test, a lead-based paint test, a tank locate, okay, you're $1,000 to $1,500 in easily.
Easy.
And so you don't want that to be a surprise when they're in the middle of a transaction, right? Going through those contingencies and reviewing the sale agreement gives you a really crystal clear opportunity to have those kind of conversations. And I can't stress that enough, and how important I think that is.
You bet. And also, you don't want, when they're writing the offer, to be the first time they've ever seen the contract.
Right.
It's just going to slow everything down, because the time might be of the essence of that particular point. One thing you might want to do, if you go into Zip Forms and you go over to the All Forms that are over on the right-hand side, there's a little arrow off to the right. If you don't already know that, you can click on that little arrow next to any form, and it'll sit there, and one of the choices is sample. So then you can click, make a sample of it. It has the sample sitting there, ghosted across with a across the document watermark across the document, and you can just hand those to them, and they have all of those at their disposal. So and I'd make those PDFs that I could just, get very quickly to any buyer, even before, if you could.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, that's a fiduciary duty, and it's an ethical responsibility. I just taught the Code of Ethics yesterday, and a lot of people don't realize that it's not acceptable to just DocuSign out something to your client without having reviewed it with them.
Yeah.
You have an ethical responsibility to make sure that you have reviewed the documents that you're sending to them and that they understand them, right? Or that they've sought legal counsel if they're asking you questions of a legal nature that you can't answer. But as a realtor in our state, you have the right and the responsibility to review standard forms with your clients.
Yep.
Okay. All right, great. Let's move on and talk about a listing appointment. Kind of the same thing as the buyer consultation, but obviously for a seller. And you as the agent, I think, determine in your business practice whether you like to go on a pre-listing appointment and then a follow-up listing appointment where you might take a market analysis, or whether you like to prepare the market analysis in advance and just go on one appointment. And either is acceptable,
yep.
Right? I mean, certainly fine. But doing a pre-listing appointment, sending a pre-listing package out with sample documentation, marketing pieces, your resume, etc., I think that's a very high mark of professionalism. And it gives you that same opportunity that you have with a buyer to review with the seller. Let's talk about the listing contract. Let's talk about what's important to you. Let's talk about your motivation, right? I want sellers who need to sell and buyers who need to buy, right?
Yep.
Because I have found in my career that I'm not very successful when I introduce sellers who just want to sell to buyers who just want to buy, right? They don't negotiate as well with each other as people who need to sell and buy, right? There's a big difference. And then again, same thing, we're determining the best pattern of communication with your seller. I don't think we need to, rehash that. But reviewing the listing documentation and the sale agreement with the seller, right? Not only are they going to sign a listing contract, but they're going to get an offer in, and they should understand how that financing contingency works. They need to know if at the end of the deal, the buyer terminates as a result a legitimate failure of the financing contingency, and it's 3 days prior to closing, and they're going to be asked to deliver the earnest money back to the buyer. You don't want that to be a shock to them.
I've had many conversations with agents where the seller's saying, I want their earnest money. Well, no. In this situation, you had agreed to these terms,
right,
but they were never explained that, so it was a surprise, and then it's anger, and that rubs off on the agent for not explaining it in the first place. So why be there? You want to have these people be your clients for life. That's the kind of thing that can be a little bit of a taint. Probably won't kill it, but why even go there? Explain those documents to them in advance.
Well, and people get frustrated when expectations aren't met, right? But if you have set it up and talked through the contingencies with them, then it's a fulfillment of an expectation. If you do have a sale fail at the last minute due to financing, while that's not what anybody wants, you have at least had the conversation and they're not surprised.
Absolutely. The surprise sucks.
Right. And same thing, right? You're setting expectations regarding the listing timeline, all of the transaction contingencies. I, think it's a great opportunity to have a discussion about how the repair negotiations are going to go. I'm telling you, I up front will say to a seller, look, you have a home. It's probably got some things wrong with it. Guess what? The home inspector is going to find those things and many things that you didn't even know. And it's going to be reasonable for a buyer to ask for some repairs. So if I were selling this house, I would go into it budgeting a certain amount of money for repairs, right? Depending upon the size of the house, depending upon the age, and what I can observe when I'm at the listing appointment, boy, you might need to budget $1,500 up to $5,000 for repairs. And so when that happens, then they're not shocked, right? then when you get a repair addendum, you're not renegotiating a whole contract with the seller because they had an expectation from your professionalism up front that this was likely going to happen.
Right, so in that case, at this particular time, the negotiation should be between the seller and the buyer, but if you haven't done this work up front, now you're having to negotiate with your client to explain the situation, and so now we got two different negotiations going on. What a mess. Just talk about it early.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm on board with that.
Also, just a note for those out there that are on RMLS, there was just a major change in the listing agreement. How well does everybody know that out there? There haven't been any classes taught on it yet that you're putting in front of your clients. Sit down, read through that, discuss it with your managing principal broker, and be comfortable with it. You may not like parts of it, you might like parts of it, but that doesn't make a difference. That's the contract you're putting in front of your clients, so you need to know it.
Yeah, I agree. I don't want to take a lot of time in this webinar, but I also serve on the RMLS Board of Directors. I was the past chair from last year when we, worked to create these coming soon no showing guidelines, and I'm not opening the door for a bunch of questions about that. I'm just going to say it is the way that it is. And I think if you sit down and review the listing agreement, if you have questions, you can do that with your managing principal broker. There are great webinars that you can watch on the RMLS home screen. I would encourage you to do that and be informed.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, great. So let's talk about preparing the offer or the listing. And I think the most salient point there is know your documents, right? How many times as a managing broker, Steve, has an agent brought something to you and the first thing that goes through the back of your mind is, did you read the form?
Often.
Often for me as well. I would say 80 to 90% of the time. And obviously, as managing...
Good agents.
And managing brokers, we're delighted to help. We want you to bring us your question. There is no such thing as a bad question.
No,
I
absolutely.
firmly believe that. So this is not a flippant comment, but it is a legitimate comment that oftentimes, if you're in a pinch and need an answer, my serious recommendation is read the document. If you read the document, you're probably going to be able to answer your own question. Sometimes not, but I think oftentimes you will. And so I really encourage you to do that. There are some tools that are available to help you with that. The Forms Matrix and the Sale Agreement Matrix in the OREF library. And I'm going to pull that up here really quick. I think you'll be able to see it on the screen. Yeah. Okay. So here's the Realtor Guide for OREF Residential Sale Agreement. If you go to the Forms library on Zip Forms, and in the search bar you type in Realtor, boom, the Realtor Guides are going to show up. There's two of them. There's the Realtor Guide for the OREF Residential Sale Agreement. This was prepared by legal counsel, and it will walk you through each section of the sale agreement, what the purpose of that section is, some tips for you as a realtor, and some resources for you as a realtor. This is an excellent document for those of you with less experience to have and review. Even when you're prepping the offer with your client, have it there as a cheat sheet. No problem. That's okay.
That's fine.
Better to have the information than make a mistake for your client or not understand something when your client asks you. If your client's sitting there and they're asking you a question about the financing contingency and you say, boy, I don't know, but you have this cheat sheet with you and you can eloquently describe it, because you have it there, way better for them. They don't care that you've got, this matrix sitting there next to you. But this is a wonderful document and a wonderful resource that I think a lot of people don't know about. Another great resource is the Realtor Guide for OREF statewide forms. This is a similar type of resource, but it goes through each form, what the title is, what the purpose of the form is, and some tips for you as a realtor and how to use that form, right? When do you use the new construction sale agreement? When do you use a backup offer addendum, and how do you do that, right? All of this is great information, and there are some wonderful tips here for you as a realtor to utilize. So I really encourage you to look through those resources and use them as a tool. Also, Online Ed. You and I both done a lot of work with Online Ed. You want to talk a little bit about what they do for us?
Well, they do a really nice job. They come through, and what's nice is they'll ask. Well, recently it's been Jeff and I have been the main speakers, if you've done any of the classes, you know, and my apologies for my part, but the first thing they do is they say, what is something that is incredibly important that you're seeing in the industry right now that we need to cover? So those are the questions they're asking. So it's not something obscure that's out there that no one's working with, something that's very tangible right at this particular moment. And so we get together, we prepare, and then we make these online, we talk, and then the forms are put up right in front of you, so as we're talking, you're going through and you're being able to see the documents. And it's a really nice resource for the agents to go out there and know this information.
Yeah, and Online Ed has done a great job. For example, if you haven't taken the LARC class yet, you can go on Online Ed, and they have one that you can take for free.
Yep.
They have a few other things that are available at no charge to you. Of course, it's an opportunity for them to have you log into their system, so if you do need some paid education hours, that's what their hope is.
Yeah, they're a business.
But that's all right. You know, they're giving a wonderful resource to OREF subscribers, and I think that's great, and we appreciate their help with it. Obviously, your managing principal broker as a key resource, right?
Yep.
Each company does things a little bit differently, but all companies have wonderful support, I think, in regard to managing principal brokers and how they help with their agents and make themselves available to answer questions and deal with problems.
The OAR legal hotline is a nice resource. That's a fee that you pay, but what's nice is once that yearly fee, and I can't remember, it's $100, I don't remember, it's a bit of a fee, but let's say you're in a situation where maybe you just have your own license and you don't have a managing principal broker to bounce stuff off of, which is a difficult situation sometimes, since I bounce them off other managing principal brokers in my office, in my company all the time.
Yep.
This would be a nice resource. You just type in your question and they'll get back to you within, typically, by the end of the day, if you're doing the morning or the next day. They're very good about that. You can get a nice answer there. They're not going to go to court for you when they're talking about legal, but they will get some information to you and really help you out with that. And the last one here on the appropriate ORA forms, absolutely. If you feel like you need to write a paragraph on a blank addendum, stop, go look and see if maybe some attorney, a legal counsel who really thought this through and it has been vetted by a whole lot of people, has written it probably better than you will, and you can go with that. Two things. One, liability, but the other thing is protecting your client and doing it the best way you can. If you have those forms that are already been vetted and legal counsel has already reviewed, use those whenever possible and don't write your own language on a blank addendum.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I see it a lot. And I think that, you know, when OREF, we are a statewide company, forms company, our forms are primarily used throughout the state. So if there is a specific document available to you for a specific purpose, there is really a standard of practice and care that you would use that document for that purpose. And I think most attorneys would say that. So I think it's important that you use the proper forms in the proper fashion and that you understand them and know what they are. And again, I would refer you back to the Realtor Guide to the Oregon Statewide Forms. If you've never looked at that document, man, pull it up and spend a few minutes perusing it. You're going to find that there's a form for something you didn't even realize there was a standard form for.
Correct.
Right. I want to jump back real quick to that OAR legal hotline. Yeah, you're right. There is a subscription service where you can make your call in, but the OAR website has just a treasure of frequently asked questions, things that they've already addressed through the legal hotline. With your NERDS number, you can log into your individual as just a broker, not a principal broker. Just you can log into your account and you can access the OAR legal hotline, and you can see, you know, some great answered questions that, you know, you might not need to make a phone call if you review that resource. I personally look at it regularly. I think OAR and Jenny Pakula, who's legal counsel or current CEO, but I think she's done a wonderful job, and I think OAR has done a wonderful job, you know, with that legal hotline, and it is a wonderful resource. So I encourage you to use it. So I think we've talked a lot about kind of professional treatment of your client, from how to set proper expectations with your client, setting up that consultation meeting, how are you going to communicate with each other, reviewing the documentation with your client. You know, obviously, you know, this isn't necessarily sales training, you're going to get that at your brokerage or wherever you get that for your CRM systems and your client care systems and all of that. But this is really, in my opinion, a baseline of professionalism. How are you going to be the professional in the transaction? And I really want to come back to something you said earlier, which I think puts a very fine point on this section of our webinar today. As the agent, you have to be the leader. You're responsible for the process, but the client's responsible for the decisions. And how many times have we seen agents acting as the principal, right? And in the spirit of cooperation, I'll illustrate that with an example. I have a listing for $475,000, or say it's $500,000.
Okay.
You're the buyer's agent. You bring me an offer of $450,000. Okay. Now that's a lowball offer, man.
Right.
Right? Or maybe you don't think that is, but in my world, that would be a lowball. Okay. And
it depends.
And immediately, without even talking to my client, I call you or email you or text you back and say, wow, man, that is a lowball offer, and I don't think my client's going to be very receptive to this. You know, I start talking negatively to you about the low offer you've just made on my listing. Okay? What I believe I'm doing at that point, because I'm trying to serve my client. I'm trying to get you to see that you're wrong and I'm right. You know, Steve, our listing price was good. You should just bring me an offer at the listing price, right? That's what's in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that. But what I'm doing tactically is creating a defense, which makes you create a defense, right? Because what are you going to say if I say, wow, that's a really low offer, Steve. I don't know that my sellers are going to be too excited about that. The natural response is, well, you know, my buyer and I have reviewed some comparable sales, and they feel like that's a fair offer, okay? Mm-hmm. So you have immediately built walls that have created a $50,000 crater between you, okay?
And the seller doesn't even know about it yet.
The seller doesn't even know you got an offer, okay? Now, you don't know what that seller's going to do. I don't know what that seller's going to do. And I'm telling you from personal experiences, I'm sure you can, you know, have seen too. A seller may have just that morning said, don't bring me an offer anywhere below asking. And then you give them an offer $50,000 below that, and they're like, oh, okay. We'll take it.
Yes.
Can we be done now? I don't have to show my house anymore. Okay, so I'm just saying, that happens. So here's a different way to look at that. And the kind of the point of all of this, the first portion of this webinar. Every offer is a gift. And I communicate that to my sellers up front. I say to my sellers, this is how I'm going to negotiate for you. I'm going to treat every offer as a gift. You're going to get a lowball offer, and you're going to be mad. I know that. And that's okay. Guess what? I'm not going to be mad. I'm going to be super excited to bring you an offer on your house. Because I believe that every offer is truly a gift. And the offer that's low is better than the offer that wasn't written. I'd rather have a buyer write an offer and put it on paper and sign it that I can deliver to you and talk with you about than have a client stand in your kitchen and go, well, we'd like this house and we'd make an offer, but we'd probably come in well below where the seller would want to be, so let's just forget it. And those conversations happen a lot.
It's a good one.
So when you bring me an offer, no matter how low it is on my listing, instead of saying, wow, Steve, this is really low and I don't know. I don't think my seller's going to be too happy with this offer. What you're going to hear from me is, thank you for the offer, Steve. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you bringing an offer on my listing. I'm going to take it to my seller, and we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to do my very best to present all of the positive points of your offer to the seller, and as soon as I have a response from the seller, I'll get back to you. That's a much different frame of mind.
No walls.
Right. I'm not creating a defense. I'm offering a receptive opportunity. I want to connect with you, man. I want to cooperate with you to sell my listing. I want that to happen. Sure, I want my seller to get the deal that they want, but I'm not building a wall at the start because you brought me a low offer. And I think that's a good way to summarize, you know, how you can take control of the process, but let your client be responsible for the decision.
That's a really good idea. And as you were listening to Jeff talking about that, he was always going, my seller, my buyer, or your buyer, whatever the case may be. Just a couple of things. One, if you catch yourself saying we or us, pronouns can trap you. You're not thinking about it, but when you say we're not going to take that. Well, unless you're in the one of the principles, It's not a we. You are the agent, and you
Yeah.
need to pull yourself out of that. Jeff said, I'm not going to be mad. That way he can be much more effective than if he was getting this anger going on, and so he's angry with his clients. That might cause a little click to happen. I don't necessarily think that's going to be positive for getting anybody's results that they wish to have.
No.
And the other point, then we can move on here, that I was going to bring up is for some agents feel like the best way that they can represent their client is to become adversarial with the other agent.
Yeah.
And like attack. And sometimes that could work, but it makes for it's a very ineffective negotiating skill, especially with realtors who usually have a pretty good ego going. And it just, I know, this is a stunner. This is a stunner for everybody. So if you start blasting somebody, Jeff was talking about walls. Those walls can get really high really quickly. And hopefully the other agent's going, okay, I'm going to calm down. That agent's that kind of agent. I'm going to just have to deal with it through this transaction, and I'm going to base my negotiation skills based upon what they're coming at me with. Don't be the agent where somebody's having to kind of figure that whole thing out. It's just kind of a waste of time. Let your clients negotiate, not you.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that 100%. So,
okay.
Very good. And that leads us back into the outline here and moving right on to the professional treatment of other agents, right? And I think that this is critical. If you're going to really be the one in control of the transaction, you have to treat agents professionally, right? You want to be treated professionally. There are some wonderful resources for that, as you could imagine, and they're all available to you. So one of the things that I recommend to my brokers is that on an annual basis, they review the Code of Ethics, right? Now, everybody has to go through Code of Ethics training every biennial now, every 2 years. And that's great, and that training is really good. But I still think you should look at it even on that off year. Just peruse it. Make sure you know what the rules of the road are. If you're a realtor, you've agreed to be bound by that Code of Ethics, you should know what it is. Oregon Real Estate Agency Guidelines. What does the ORS 696 and the standards of practice say, right? What am I duty bound to do? What are my fiduciary responsibilities? PMAR Best Practices is an excellent resource. I think that's a wonderful document. And PMAR did a wonderful job of putting that together however many years ago, and it's still as viable and credible today as it was 10, 13 years ago when it was created.
It's great.
And then RMLS rules and regulations. So these 4 things, what I would challenge everybody who's listening to this webinar to do is to plot on your calendar during the slowest time of your year, on the slowest day of the week for you, a 2 to 3 hour block of time to review the Code of Ethics, the OREA guidelines, the PMAR best practices, and the RMLS rules and regulations. I am telling you, if you have instinctive knowledge of those rules because you have physically looked at those documents and reviewed them, you are going to be at the top 5% of professionals in the Portland metro area. And we didn't put any hyperlinks in here for you because you can just Google them. And wonderfully, they're the first things that come up. I'm going to prove that to you. LMGTFY. Let me Google that for you, right? Okay, so the Code of Ethics, if you just Google it, pardon my typing ability, boom, there it is, right? Let me get this chat box out of here. Code of Ethics, Investopedia, Public Relations. If you type in NAR Code of Ethics, it'll take you right to the NAR Code of Ethics. You can just click on it. Same thing, even the PMAR Best Practices. PMAR Best Practices. If you type that into Google, it's the first thing that comes up on Google. And I'm not going to walk you through the other ones, but it's the same way, even the RMLS rules and regulations. If you type that into Google, it's going to come right on up, and you're going to be able to easily peruse it and look through it.
And Jeff and I were talking before we went on live here. Back, wasn't that long ago, 15 years ago, you'd see this, you'd have pages of links to all the pages. Well,
yeah.
Google is so good, whoever.
Why do you need that?
You don't need that anymore. Just Google it, they're right there, popped up right off the bat, just
Bingo.
do it.
Yep, great stuff. All right, so we kind of talked through those points, but let's talk about the spirit of cooperation and not confrontation,
Yeah.
right? I think we've illustrated a very good example of that with, you know, an offer coming in on your listing. But let's talk about how that works in other points of negotiation
Okay.
throughout the contract as well, right? We all know we're going to be negotiating repairs. There's a way to do that that's not confrontational, right? That's cooperative in nature. And I think the bottom line there is that if you go into it with the premise in your mind that we are all pulling on the same side of the rope here, right? This isn't a tug of war against each other. We're all on the same side of the rope. The goal is a closed transaction. My seller wants to sell their house. Your buyer wants to buy their house, right? So their house is the object. A completed transaction is what is a win for both the buyer and the seller. So you and I as brokers are on the same page. We're not competing with each other anymore. We're cooperating with each other to get that goal accomplished for your client and my client. Now, there are going to be some details throughout the negotiation that might create some differences of opinion. Yes, your buyer wants to purchase my seller's property if they can get it for this price. Yes, my seller wants to sell your buyer their property if they can get this price. We need to come together on that price. No different on the negotiation of the repairs. Your buyer wants to continue in the transaction if the seller will complete such and such repairs. My seller is willing to continue in the transaction if they only have to do such and such repairs. So there are some natural things that may be of conflict, but that doesn't mean that we're not still cooperating with each other for the same goal, which is to close the deal and have your buyer purchase a house they want to buy and my seller sell a home that they want to sell. And I really think that you have to just think, you have to think of that in your mind when you're doing these negotiations, that we're working with each other here. We're not fighting with each other.
Well, I totally agree. I love that picture. We're both going the same direction.
Right.
The goal towards pushing this to closing. That doesn't mean it's a negative for your client. It doesn't mean that you're rolling over or whatever the case may be, what terms you're going to be doing there. It just means that sense of cooperation. What could work here? What are some other options that might be available? What do you think? Just having these conversations as an agent and helping these things get into place to put something viable together that both parties are going to agree to. That's what I love about real estate. Really, 95% of the time, it's a win-win.
Yeah.
You know, maybe everybody's got a little scuffed up by the time the inspection period's over, but they feel like a win. Okay, I was able to sell my house. I'm okay with what's happening here. Buyer, the same thing. And it happens most of the time. Just be thinking that's your goal, not. I think I would have trouble let's say if I was an attorney in a field of law that would require a winner and a loser.
Yeah.
Personally, I'd have trouble with that. Just trying to beat somebody.
Yeah.
In real estate, it is cooperative and it is a win-win.
Yeah, and I think, even in the legal profession, I think it's more and more rare that things actually go to trial where there's a winner and a loser, and most commonly things are settled, where people are compromising and negotiating what is a win for both people, right? And I think that's pretty common in the legal field as well. One point about that, I'm going to skip point F and go to point G here on bullet 3, which is, one way to maintain that level of cooperation is to not internalize the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Look, if you've been in real estate for longer than 2 weeks, you know that your primary job is a problem solver, right? Your primary job is a prospector.
Yes.
And then a problem solver, right? That's the deal. That's what you signed up for, okay? So don't internalize those problems. And the way to do that is to be the professional and consult with your client first. Then communicate with the other agent. And here's what that looks like. I get a repair addendum. It's 3 pages long, and it has everything on the inspection report on it. Okay?
Yep.
Now, that can be pretty frustrating, especially if it comes in at 3 o'clock on the last day of the inspection period. Okay? Now, you just set yourself up for failure there. I'm not trying to be ridiculous, but I'm being dramatic to prove a point. Even in those extremely tense type of circumstances, you can be the professional. You can diffuse that situation by, instead of being upset with the other agent and asking them why the heck they took so long to get that to you and why they didn't tell you in advance that the buyer was thinking of asking all of these things, right? Now we're arguing with each other because you're a bad agent, you've done a bad thing, and now I'm mad and I have to go deal with this, right? Let's not do that. Instead, let me say to you, hey, thank you for getting that to me. We've got 2 hours to go here. I'm going to get it to my seller. I'm going to do my best to get your response by 5 o'clock. I'm not sure that's going to happen, Steve, but I'm going to do my very best to make that happen. And I will, I'm going to deliver what your buyer wants to my seller. I'm going to let them make up their mind about how they want to proceed here, okay? I have not internalized the problem. I have not made any statements that I shouldn't make on behalf of the principal in the transaction without their permission.
Well, they're not going to accept that.
Right. I haven't made any statements.
Nothing like that.
All I'm saying is, let me communicate with my seller first and get back to you. Now, I get on the phone with my seller, and the seller is hopping mad, and they're not going to respond, and they're not going to do this, or they're not going to do that. My job is to, let them voice and go through it with them, and then get them to a point of, okay, now what do you want to do? If you really think this is unfair and you don't want to respond, I'll be sure to communicate that to the other agent, but obviously that means they might choose to terminate. Would you prefer to maybe offer an extension so we have some time to hopefully come to a reasonable resolution that all parties can agree to here? What do you want to do? And then I'm simply communicating with the other agent. Here's what the seller has said they want to do. They've made up their mind, or they want to extend. Here is that in writing, and here's what they want to do. But I'm never internalizing it. I'm never saying, well, this isn't right, and I'm not happy about this, because I don't have to be happy about it. I don't care. I do care.
I know, you care for your client, but
yeah,
internally not.
Right. But I'm going to go home and have dinner that night. When this whole mess is over, I'm still going to go be me, right? In the meantime, I have a client who I have to be concerned about. And what I want to do is, in a very timely fashion, deliver the buyer's request to the seller and get the seller's response back so that I can deliver that back to you. And I know that if I can keep the level of communication between us to me expressing to you the wishes of my client instead of my wishes, you are more likely to reciprocate that as a professional and then respond in kind by offering that same courtesy to me by saying, okay, well, I'm going to take this to my buyer now and see what they want to do. And now you have a buyer and a seller negotiating with each other instead of agents arguing with each other. And that's a far better outcome.
Far better.
Okay, so very good. If there is a problem that you and the other agent can't solve, I think it's important for you to keep in mind that communication should always be agent to agent, broker to broker, and principal broker to principal broker. As a managing broker for a large company, it is very common that I get complaints that will come to me directly from another agent, from a broker, not the principal broker. Okay? And I usually will contact my broker and say, hey, here's what's going on, fill me in on the details, of course, but then I'm communicating back to the principal broker, and I'm saying, hey, your agent called me, obviously I want to communicate that to you so you can talk to them and let them know what the resolution is. But it's appropriate. If you're a broker listening, please keep that in mind, that if you're really not able to communicate with the broker on the other side of the transaction and there's a problem that's unreconcilable between you, go to your principal broker and have your principal broker reach out to the principal broker on the other side. That, in Oregon, is the appropriate channel and flow of communication. You agree?
I absolutely agree, and probably that situation was created most likely because of all the other things we're talking about, professional treatment of the other agents. Probably the ones that reached to Jeff or to me are ones where at least one of the parties in the transaction was not doing that. It became adversarial between the agents and they couldn't accomplish the goals for their clients, and so that's why we got involved. So
yeah,
there would be a lot less calls managing principal broker to managing principal broker, and they don't happen that often for various reasons, but there would be far less if everybody was doing that professional treatment of the other agents, because they could be resolving this and there wouldn't be that angst that's creating, okay, I have a wall, I can't get by it, so now I'm going to have to go to the managing principal broker and get around it that way. So, and that kind of rubs off on both parties, I believe, usually.
Yeah, I agree. And, you've heard me illustrate this before, and I do this in a lot of my trainings, but I think it's really illustrative of kind of the bottom line here on how to treat another agent. I'm an active broker. I know you are too. We both also manage. I know, even though I might not recognize your phone number, you know, if we had a negative transaction 2 or 3 years ago, throughout the course of the transaction, how many times are we going to call each other? How many times am I going to see your number show up on my phone, right?
A lot of times.
A lot. And even if I don't have a photographic memory and can't place that number exactly to you 3 years down the road, 3 years down the road, if you want to call me again to set up a showing appointment on one of my listings, I see that your number show up on my phone, and in the pit of my gut, I have a bad feeling. Right?
Yes.
I don't know why. I just know I recognize that number and I don't want to take that phone call. Okay? Or I'm neutral to it. I recognize the number. I don't remember anything necessarily bad or good, so yeah, I'll take the call. Or maybe I recognize that number and think, man, that's Steve. I can't wait to take Steve's call. That was such a great transaction we had, 2 or 3 years ago, or whatever our last communication was with each other. So put it in that perspective, right? I know that those of you who are listening are chuckling inside because you have had that same experience. You have seen a number come across your phone and immediately thought, ooh, I don't know who that is, but I know I don't like them. It happens.
It does.
And I'm telling you, if you set up your transactions and you treat the other agent so professionally, no matter what they're saying to you, no matter how they're treating you, if you offer them the grace and the professional courtesy to have a bad day and still be kind to them, even if they're not treating you how you want to be treated, take the upper hand, right? Do the right thing. And they're going to be so delighted to work with you that they can't wait to work with you again. And I'm telling you, there is a positive impact of that on your business and for your clients.
Absolutely.
I want you to have such a positive experience in working with me that you can't wait to sell another one of my listings. That when you see a buyer come in from me for one of my buyers and there's 3 other offers on the table, you're talking to the seller and you're saying, all of these offers are pretty close to the same, and man, we want to work with Jeff because he's going to get it done and he's a pro, right?
Absolutely.
That's what I want, and that's what I hope you want to, okay? The other point that I make there is, if another agent is not treating you professionally, and I've said it already, but I'll say it again because I think it's worth the point. You don't know what's going on in the life of that other person, right? And my experience in life is when people are treating me poorly, it usually has more to do with them than me. I'm just the convenient target for their anger at that moment. But the source of their anger might be that, their spouse filed for divorce, or a parent just died, or their kid just got expelled from school, or whatever. Or they just got in a car wreck. Or, you just never know what's going on behind the scenes in their life. And that's what I'm really saying is, boy, give the grace to allow somebody else to have a bad day and keep your professionalism. It will refocus them. More times than not, it will bring them back to a professional treatment of you if you maintain your professionalism. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. I had an example. We're running a little short of time.
It's okay. 12 minutes. I think we got time.
Well, I'll do a quick example then. This was somebody who took a chandelier and just went off to Las Vegas with the chandelier, the seller. And so then I was a managed principal broker. He was really angry, felt like he was justified to take the chandelier. Basically, 3/4 of the conversation started with the letter F at me. And I listened to the whole thing, and it's not like I haven't heard the word before. And at the end, I just said, okay, that's good. Let's talk about this. Hey, if it's okay if we don't use the F word anymore. I was a little more succinct with that. I said, I'd really appreciate that. I think we could move ahead a little bit quicker. He all of a sudden just opened up, apologized for a long period of time, said he's not that kind of person. This is not what he was doing. He's just sort of having a really rough time with this new job, and just like Jeff was talking about. He ended up sending the chandelier back. I really didn't even have to do anything else. He was embarrassed by his own actions. But I didn't sit there and attack him about it. I just said, could we move it away from there and move it more into a professional phase? and it worked out fine. So yes,
Great example.
yeah.
Yeah, great example.
And I talked to him about, I'm sorry your job is, I mean, I went over on a personal level and started talking about that because he was having problems.
You
So
made a
anyway.
real connection with somebody, and that brought them back to the table. I
Yep,
think, too.
yep.
Okay, good. Let's move on to tying up some of the loose ends and closing on time. I think this is a really critical point. I think it's imperative that you follow up on all the contingencies and make sure that they're met in the transaction. I'm a firm advocate in my transactions. I don't like things to automatically expire.
Yeah.
I don't like if this contingency will automatically go away if somebody doesn't do something about it. It's pretty common, based upon how our form is currently drafted, that we do that. The preliminary title report is a great example of that. Now, I don't think that's the end of the world necessarily, but I do think that there's high risk in some of these contingencies in allowing them to just automatically expire and with no firm resolution from the buyer of, I have made a decision, instead of I just allowed it to happen.
Yes.
Right? Homeowners association, condo sales, townhouses, properties that are in an HOA, I think is the best example of that. I am not a fan of allowing the HOA document review contingency to automatically expire without a firm statement from the buyer that I received everything I was supposed to, and I have decided based upon my review of those documents that I am going to continue to close this transaction, or that I want to terminate because I am not satisfied with what I have read. That is the position after closing, that if you work for my company, that I'm telling you we want our buyers to be in. And by the way, I don't see that as a negative. I don't see that as my agent taking away a contingency from my buyer for our company. I see that as our agent being proactive in saying to their client, it is important to us that you know that you received the things that you asked for, or that you didn't receive something that you asked for, and that based upon that, you are either satisfied with this property and want to buy it, or that you tell me now that you don't want to buy it and we will terminate. One of those two things needs to happen. But I am not going to not ask you, and by default, let the contingency expire, and then post-closing, find out that there was an issue that we weren't aware of because you didn't get a document that you didn't know you received. I don't believe that that's an adequate level of professionalism.
No, as you were talking about before with the process and the decisions, the buyer's making these decisions, well, both clients, but in this case, the buyer's making these decisions on these. You want it to be a decision, not a non-decision.
Right.
Which, if it expires, it's not, nothing happened, they just, well, it just zipped on by. And what would an attorney say 2 years from now with that level of documentation?
Yeah, and so to that degree, the way to deal with that right now is through the receipt of reports and removal of contingencies addendum. Now, this document is not specifically intended for that purpose.
Right.
It is not an HOA document review contingency notice, which, that's a discussion for another day. But it is the best document we have in the library at the time for effecting the removal of that contingency, right?
Yep.
It's up on the screen. It's OREF-059, Receipt of Reports, Removal of Contingencies Addendum. And this is where you would, ask the buyer to fill in all of the reports they received and the number of pages and all of that stuff, and then either remove the contingency or waive the contingency. And if they're not going to remove or waive the contingency, then you would have to send a notice of termination and say, hey, we're going to terminate. We're not satisfied with it, and we're not moving forward. But this is the document that you would use for that purpose, OREF-059 in the Zip Forms library. And I think that's, as a professional, the way that you would want to make sure your client has satisfied the HOA document review contingency. Another big one is in regard to repair addendum, right? How often do we see a repair addendum that's either accepted or the seller has countered the repair addendum and that's been accepted, and there are repairs that are going to be completed in the transaction?
Yes. But
there is no written proof at the end of the transaction that they were completed. That happens a lot. I don't know if you see it in your brokerage. I sure see it. I'm not trying to put my brokerage in the spotlight here, but I see it a lot. It happens. And I think it's pretty common in the industry that we don't tie up that loose end. If there are repairs that are being completed in the transaction, there's a document titled Notice and Acceptance of Completion of Repairs and Corrective Action. It is a very simple document. And by the way, if there are repairs, the lender should be made aware of those repairs, and the lender's going to require some statement showing that the repairs have been completed. And a lot of times I see agents put that on an addendum. Repairs completed to buyer satisfaction or whatever. They get some language from the underwriter. You don't need that. What you need is this form, OREF-023. It's a notice and acceptance of completion of repairs. It says seller hereby gives notice that the repairs are completed. They sign it. The buyer then says, buyer hereby confirms that the repairs that are agreed to in the transaction have been completed, and they accept the same. And they sign it. And that's it.
There you go.
You've got that document. You submit that to the mortgage broker. They give it to the underwriter. Boom. Open and shut. It's done. Depending upon the nature of the repair, the underwriter, may want the appraiser to come back out and take a look. But I will tell you, more often than not, if this document is submitted to the mortgage broker to go, to follow up the repair addendum that was turned in, this is acceptable. This satisfies most underwriting conditions, I think.
And along with that, be sure, just another note on that, be sure that if you represent the seller and they get paid invoices for all that work,
yeah,
send that as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, because now that's required. If they've used the repair addendum,
the repair
that's
addendum
required.
states it, but I see
Absolutely.
These files that don't have all that documentation in there.
Yeah, and I think, again, that's a really tidy way to tie up that loose end. And after closing, if something, crops back up, don't you want to be in the position of being able to prove, well, you reviewed the repairs, you had an opportunity to re-inspect, I encouraged that re-inspection. And so, if there is a problem now, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to take that up with the contractor or the seller, but I did my job as the professional of the transaction for you. And again, this isn't a matter of risk management more than it's a matter of good professionalism. Don't you want your client to know for sure that the repairs were completed to their satisfaction? And if that is true, don't you want that in your file in written evidence signed by them that they did agree to that? Absolutely. You do. All right, and then moving on to coordination with the lender and escrow, be proactive and help the buyer and the seller understand those TRIG timelines and guidelines, right?
Which are spelled out very nicely in the sales agreement.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that that's well done and helps everybody understand that. And then always attend the signing appointment, right? I mean, I attend all of mine, and I think that's just a mark of professionalism and a good way to show that you're taking care of your client. Right?
Absolutely.
I think for most disputes after closing, when a buyer or seller goes to an attorney and has a problem with their agent, it's probably one of the first questions that's asked is, was your agent there at the closing? Right? Okay. Post-closing, serving your client for life, right? I think most people probably have an effective CRM, client relationship management platform or retention management platform, with automated follow-ups to their clients, strip marketing campaigns, all of those things. One of the things that I do is I make a personal phone call 1 week, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year after closing. And I plot those on my calendar. The deal closes, I go onto my calendar, and 1 week later on that day, I put in 1 week phone call to so-and-so. It shows up, I make the call. Okay?
Excellent.
I want to know. I want to know how things are going, right? As opposed to, well, I had a great realtor. I wish I could remember their name so I could use them again, right?
Yes.
Or my realtor got their commission check and I never heard from them again. Be the realtor who's willing to proactively call your client and say, hey, how are things going with the house? Have you moved in? Maybe I can swing by and got a bouquet of flowers for you, or whatever it is that you like to do for your closings. But offering that level of service, I think, is really important. It also, I think, illustrates the point that when there are post-closing issues, while you want to have a client for life, your representation ends at the closing of the transaction.
Except for confidentiality.
Except for confidentiality. You still have an obligation of confidentiality, of course, but you no longer represent that buyer or seller.
Nope.
You're not an attorney. They might be your client, but you don't represent them anymore. So if there is a post-closing issue, there are limitations on what you can do. The best thing you can do is put the buyer and seller in contact with each other, right?
Yes.
Refer them to the dispute resolution procedures that are outlined in the sale agreement. Refer them to legal counsel. Notify your principal broker of the issue. But remember that you're not an attorney and your representation concluded when the deal closed. So, how many times do we see that by the time something gets to your desk as the managing broker, the buyer's agent has been in communication with the listing agent. They've been trying to resolve the dispute and get the seller and buyer happy with each other. And what they've done is made a bigger mess, because now both the buyer and the seller have dug in their heels a little more on their positions.
Absolutely.
And potentially some of the information that was shared back and forth between the agents weakens the case of one or the other. And now that buyer and that seller are going to talk to an attorney, and their attorney is saying, oh gosh, you shouldn't have given the seller all of this information. You've diminished your ability to actually have a real claim against the seller, and you, the agent, acted as an attorney in trying to negotiate a dispute because you don't represent them anymore.
And you're not an attorney
And
either.
you shouldn't have done that.
Yep.
The best way to serve your client is to make sure they understand what your limitations are and help them know, I want you to get a positive outcome here, but here's how that's got to be.
Absolutely. And if you get you're from your client after the closing, and then their attorney calls you, and they're just really friendly, and they're very good about just calling and just saying, hey, I'm just trying to find out some information. There's no problem here, blah, blah, blah. Just keep it to the facts, and if there's a situation, just don't say a lot. You're going to try to be helpful, and helpful can kind of sometimes put you under the bus.
Yes. Immediately inform your principal broker.
Immediately, then. There's an attorney. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Yeah, and take good documentation. At the moment of the incident, that's when you should document and make notes in your file, because it might be 8 months to a year before you get a summons or a notice of that official dispute, from the time that somebody called you with a minor complaint.
Right.
Right? The last point that I make, that I want to talk about real quick, and I know we're 1 minute over, is just positive follow-up with the cooperating agent, a personal note or phone call, thanking them for the work that they've done and setting a positive tone for the next transaction. I think that's always appropriate. And in our fast-paced market, in our fast-paced world, it gets overlooked. I know I'm guilty of overlooking it.
Well, I know that agents come in and say, hey, look what the other agent just maybe sent a nice card or something. It's so special. It feels good. It made them feel good. Do that again with the next time there's a listing, or next time you're presenting an offer to another agent, there'll be a real positive energy going on there. And as we all know, it's a multiple offer situation, and they're really close. If you have a personal knowledge of a lender, or certainly of the other agent, it's okay to talk to your client about that, and they'll say, okay, well, if you have a good deal with that person, let's go with that way. And it's just a good way to do your business, and it makes it more fun, too. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, okay. I agree. It does make it more fun, without a doubt.
I think we're done.
So a couple of announcements about the webinar. So it will be posted on orefonline.com under the resources link by June 1st or sooner. So look for it there if you want a refresher on our webinar today. For those of you that are brokers or assistants that registered for your brokerage for the webinar, you're responsible for submitting your sign-in sheet no later than Monday, May 15th. And then CE certificates will be issued within 10 days by May 25th following the webinar. So be sure to turn in your sign-in sheets to Monica at OREF, right? And you can contact OREF LLC at 503-459-0195 for any additional information, or if you have questions. I believe that we were able to address all of the questions that came in as we went through the webinar, and there wasn't anything that needed, I think, for public consumption. So thank you, everybody. I hope it was worth your time today. Steve, always a pleasure.
Yep. Great time.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.